Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well.
You've been better though,
And
4IS, haven't you? Huh? You've been
uh,
better.
Well, I guess what you're kind of alluding to is today. It's been a while since we talked about political commentary, but
Yep, yep,
today's the perfect day to do that, especially
yep.
after what happened with The Voice.
Yes, yes. I think it was a good idea to unpack this one from a strategic perspective. There's a lot of kind of emotion around it, a lot of identity politics, I like to call it. I think you refer to it in a different way as culture wars. But
Yes.
I know that you've been involved with the whole voice saga, and you've been a yes campaigner and a
Yep.
very strong advocate for it. So I want to do something a little bit different than a lot of the kind of media articles that you see and the stuff that you might see around social media or on the mainstream news and all that sort of stuff. I want to unpack basically what it is that you think kind of went wrong with the Yes campaign then, and why you think that people in this country, that is Australia, majoritively voted no. What are the lessons learnt for AS? Because constitutional matters like this, for all those people that aren't actually aware, this was actually a constitutional matter, hence why it was part of a referendum. Constitutional matters for me as a revolutionary are revolutionary snapshots in time. And so
Yeah.
this is more than apt to discuss on our Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. But like with all things of this type of revolutionary nature, they need to be analysed critically in order to get a good understanding about what can be done better in the future, what
Yeah.
needs to happen around these types of issues. So, like first off,
Yeah.
I want to know kind of your thoughts on why the decision and why Saturday went down the way it did.
Okay. Well, I feel like you could explain this in two very broad strokes, and obviously we'll drill down to it. And the first one is the elephant in the room.
Hmm.
And uh, that was the media concentration and the sheer amount of misinformation and disinformation that was out there.
Yeah.
Let me. It's funny that you do mention the Constitution, and I feel like a big factor in this is that a lot of the public didn't really understand our constitution. Like, I can tell you a straight story from one of my colleagues when they were volunteering on the day. Someone basically said to them along the lines of, "Oh, hey, I know my rights. I know I have the freedom of speech, and I can vote no if I want to." And anyone that knows the Constitution, that person was obviously referring to the American Bill of
Yeah,
Rights.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
that brings us back to what you were saying is that
Hmm.
what that lends itself to is that that person, and maybe there were other people in that elk that just simply didn't understand what our constitution was about.
Yeah,
Like, obviously, the amendments that are in the American Constitution, yes, there are very clear rights, but
yeah. In their Bill
really,
of Rights, they
yeah,
have clear cut.
but like the Australian Constitution is basically, what things are and like how certain political institutions
Yeah,
function in our
yeah,
democracy.
yeah. It's just a
So,
playbook, really, isn't it? It just
yeah,
says these are the different levels of government, and this is how they relate to each other, and these are how they need to carry out certain functions, and that's pretty much it.
well,
Like,
yes, and this is where let's knock off the misinformation and disinformation points. Like, the big one for me that's very heavily tied to the Constitution is the huge talking point of, oh, there is no detail, there is no detail.
yeah,
Now, I liked a quote that I did hear from someone. I think it was even a fellow YouTuber, that the Constitution creates it and the Parliament legislates it.
Mm.
So when I was actually speaking to people when they didn't really understand what the Constitution was, is I use the example of the section that talks about the Senate. So in the Senate, you know, it, each state and territory basically has a certain number of senators, and that is actually based on the population.
Yep.
So, for illustrative purposes, let's say there's 500,000 people that live in New South Wales, and that entitles them to 10 senators.
Yep.
Now, that sort of detail as to how many people you have or how many senators you have, you don't put that in the Constitution because everything is run by a referendum when it comes to the Constitution if you make any changes.
Yep.
So in that theoretical example where you're like, oh, you know what, let's put all of that detail in the Constitution. Now, the funny thing about every single election and all of that is that boundaries change, populations change. So if you were to put that sort of detail into the Constitution, it would become an administrative exercise. So basically, every single time you got to a new election, your numbers would update. You would have to update your senator numbers, and then you would have to go and have a referendum for something as simple as the numbers kind of changing.
Yeah.
And that's ridiculous. Like, that would just be a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah.
So, yes, like the detail that they're asking for is technically irrelevant to what was being asked.
Which is a constitutional change.
Yeah, like basically the voice was just talking about that the structure would exist and that later when this was actually passed, it would actually be the Parliament that legislates it and goes through all of those details. When people were saying like, yeah, but you can't even tell me this point and this point, it was like, yeah, but it's a cart before the horse thing, you asking that. And again, that brings us back to people not really understanding the Constitution. I'm not saying it's their fault for not understanding it. You know, I don't know, maybe we need to update our education system because really, actually, to be fair, I actually had not read the Constitution up until this referendum. It was only when I was like, oh, well, this is actually relevant to me now. Maybe I'm going to be volunteering on this. Maybe I should understand how this actually works.
Do you think then that the fact that people didn't know what the Constitution was or how this would kind of be entered into the Constitution was a failure or a failing of the Yes campaign and the referendum at large?
Well, what I would say, though, is that, look, Brexit has happened. Like, a lot of, well, I guess we're kind of going into the culture war aspect of things, but like, we had seen before, you know, from Brexit as well as Trump getting into office, that it's actually a conservative playbook thing that was started by Steve Bannon in the US, which is called flooding the zone. So basically, it's somebody that has, I guess, market power in terms of media, and what they do is, to their opposition, they just kind of just throw statement after statement after statement at them, either showing a misunderstanding of what the points are about or just spreading complete lies about their points of view. And what ends up happening is your opposition goes into firefighter mode where they're like, oh, well, no, this is the truth about this matter. Oh, no, this is the truth about this matter. And instead of actually putting your point across, you're having to put out those fires.
And so can you give me like an example then of like the disinformation or the lies that were spread about the yes vote?
Sure.
Give me
okay, well, the there is no detail is definitely one of them. Look,
And
it depends on
there
how.
was detail because there was like a whole kind of literature piece put out about how the voice is supposed to
Yes,
operate and all that sort of stuff, right?
yes,
And
thank you for bringing that up. There obviously is the framework. And hey, if you go back a couple of months ago, we actually went through that framework
yeah,
on this
yeah,
podcast. And that
yeah,
was actually from a 272 page document that was,
so
I think it was
basically,
the voice co-design report. And like,
yes,
it goes into quite a lot of detail as to
detail.
how the framework goes.
Mm,
Obviously, those granular details of like, oh, how many representatives there are going to be. Like, yeah, obviously that hadn't been hashed out yet because it had to go through the parliamentary process.
yeah,
But having said that, though, I wouldn't expect your average Joe on the street to understand that. So that's where the doubt was very easy to kind of
mm,
put in people's minds.
yes,
But in terms of what you were saying, like it was essentially a death by a thousand cuts because obviously you could go with far more like wild theories
like what's a
like
wild theory
okay,
about it?
well, for example,
Yeah,
I obviously made that video on my channel about the voice, and
mm,
I actually had somebody who was going back and forth with me, like just saying that they weren't sure about it, where they were questioning Thomas Mayo. So he was one of the head Yes campaigners. He was a Torres Strait Islander man,
yeah.
and
Was he an
they
author of the framework as well?
yeah, he was definitely part. I'm pretty sure he was definitely part of the referendum like group that
Yeah,
was part of the dialogues and stuff like that. Like he like along with Noel Pearson, he was very heavily involved in everything.
yeah,
But somebody was basically saying to me, "Oh well, hey, he's a Torres Strait Islander man. He's not even Aboriginal. So why is he the head of all of this?" And I just sat there and was just looking at my screen. And I'm like, does this person not realize that this whole process is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander? Like
yeah,
that,
yeah,
like the First Nation people. That's all of
yeah.
them collectively.
So there's
Like
like
this person just
fundamental like information that people just don't get,
yeah, like
like
it
really
was
basic
like
stuff.
yeah, like this person, from what I gathered, they just thought it was about Aboriginal mobs and that was it. Like I did end up explaining to him, I'm like, you do know it's the that it's about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it was almost as if that person was saying like, oh, it's this outside person that really shouldn't be considered at all,
yeah,
and why are they one of the faces? And it's like,
yeah,
well, actually, I think you've just gotten the wrong end of the stick here.
yeah.
And then okay, what's another point of at least that seemed reasonable was okay, there's another point that was like stuff that was kind of taken out of context was
Mm,
there was talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community groups. I think it was the NIAA, which I forget what that specifically stands for, but it was something that Tony Abbott had said, where it's like, oh well, these community organizations are getting $30 billion per year, and actually, where he got that figure from was in 2017 there was like a productivity commission report
hmm.
that basically broke down per ethnicity, race in Australia, like how much was dedicated based on the spread dedicated to each ethnicity and race. And it
Yeah.
just so happened for defense, for health, for everything, that's where that 30 billion figure was coming from. But it was
Mm,
presented in such a way that, oh, for their concerns and everything, they're already receiving such great funding. So why do we need the voice? Like it
yeah.
was a complete but that's more, I would say, rather than disinformation that was more misinformation or misinterpreting what that was supposed to be saying.
Right, right. So instead of the issue being about allowing them to have some type of constitutional power, it was more just about, oh, well, they get a lot of money, so why do they need to have this? But that's not the point of the matter. The matter was
Yes.
more about, having enshrining some type of right into our kind of political system, as opposed to like who gets what and who's better off than other people based on that kind of figure or sum or something like that.
Yes. And also, there's probably another elephant in the room that we should probably go into, which I don't think many people outside of Australia actually would be aware of,
Yeah.
which was the media bargaining code. So let me start the story of um, I, I'm pretty sure it was around 2019 when Scott Morrison first got the prime ministership. That was when News Corp was taken over by the Murdoch empire, and there was a huge concentration within the media that was basically controlled majoritively by Murdoch. Now, from that, we fast forward it to 2021, and in 2021, there was huge discussions about this thing called the Media Bargaining Code. So, long story short, with it, Murdoch and basically his people took huge issue with Facebook, with YouTube, like all of these online tech giants, because they regularly allowed people to, post their news articles and everything. So from that, uh, Murdoch made the argument that, hey, you're letting social media post all of our articles, and we're losing a lot of revenue from this. So as a publisher, you should give us a cut. Now that was the smokescreen, but what was actually written into this code as well, and what the Murdoch lawyers were able to do was get the algorithms of Facebook, of YouTube, like
they get access to the algorithms.
Yeah, they got access to the algorithms by
Which is like the
establishing that.
holy grail for like any content creator, right? Like everybody wants to know what the algorithm's doing, man.
Yeah, like I guess it was technically a byproduct of what they were doing. But when they were able to prove that they were a publisher, what came along with it is they did some sort of sharing with Google and YouTube, which really at the end of the day, as far as the tech giants were concerned, is, hey, if we can continue our ad revs, our advertising, we're fine with whatever. Like, just do what you want to do, whatever. And when Murdoch got control of the algorithms, like suddenly all his articles took preference, or his videos, I should say. That's the reason why when you go onto YouTube or Facebook or anything now, that's the reason why Sky News or that sort of thing is shown first to you. It's because they know the algorithms in the background. Now, let's fast forward again to 2023.
Give us the connection here.
2023. If, for example, there is all of this misinformation and disinformation, and the media are just picking up on all of the negativity that's coming out of the No campaign, you can see where I'm going with this. It's basically a juggernaut and a snowball effect, which, look, we got to where we are. If everyone's discussing there's not enough detail rather than, hey, this is actually how the Constitution works. If everyone's discussing, hey, aren't we already spending billions of dollars on the on Aboriginal communities already, rather than actually no, these are the real figures, and actually the community is majorly in favor of this, which
Yeah.
I might add, the statistics are coming out from the referendum now, and sure, it's not as high as 80 or 83% of the communities, the mobs. I think it's more like 70 to 73. That's still a majority of the
Yeah,
community.
so that's 73% of the mobs were actually in favor of the Yes campaign.
Yeah, between 70 to
Yeah, because that
73.
was very interesting. I was at a polling place early in the day, and I witnessed a rather confrontational gentleman, let's say. And using the description "gentleman" is, you know, a far cry from what this person actually was. But let's just say a confrontational gentleman.
Yeah.
And keep it civil. He saw two kind of Yes campaigners handing out their flyers, and he basically walked up to them and said something along the lines of, what are you doing that for? Why are you part of the Yes campaign? Are you even Indigenous? And these two obviously not Indigenous people were like, well, no. And he's just like, well, then why don't you listen to the Aboriginal people then? They're all voting no. And like stormed off into cast his vote, I guess. And I just found that a very striking situation because obviously this person was heavily under the assumption that any Indigenous persons in the nation and across the nation were, ardently going to be voting no that day. And I was just kind of thinking to myself, where did he get this idea from? Does he know any Indigenous people? Has he been speaking to Indigenous people about this? I was just assuming that he probably hadn't talked to even one, but he was very, very passionate in his stance that Indigenous people outrightly did not support the Yes campaign and were not on board with this referendum. So if you're saying the statistics are kind of 73-4, which is a majority and a clear majority of Indigenous persons, then where did he get that idea from?
Well, no, but that goes back to what we were talking about before as well. That look, I would say about 3 or 4 months ago, there was a U poll, and I think there was another poll as well, which had actually polled the Indigenous communities, and that's where the Yes campaign was kind of throwing around the whole thing of 80 to 83% of the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people do support the voice because they were relying on this poll.
Yeah.
But a lot of the mainstream media were interviewing people, or at least Indigenous mobs and all of that didn't agree to it. So because naturally, if you have a poll that says 80% of people are in favor of it, then naturally the flip side of that is 20% aren't in favor of it.
Yeah.
And it's that 20%, including Jacinta Price and Warren Mondine, that were getting all of the
airtime.
We're getting all of the airtime, but along with that, there actually was. I'll have to find this report for you, MysterE. But there was a report that was done by Victoria Fielding, I think it's the Royal Commission Against Murdoch.
Yeah,
I think this was something that was started by good old Kevin Rudd. Because this
King Kev,
good old King Kev, because this was around the time that he wanted to have an inquiry into Murdoch because of that media concentration, and some very interesting statistics came out from it. They were saying that up until that point that they did the report, that 70% of the coverage on the ABC was dedicated to the No campaign. So take that into consideration. ABC, which is considered, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. So this is like a national corporation. It's not somebody that's
broadcaster.
Exactly, it's the public broadcaster, and in that report, they're saying, well, we have statistics that say that disproportionately you're showing one side in comparison to the other, which really, when you kind of break down all of those ideals, like, don't get me wrong, I haven't seen the journalist charter or the Hippocratic Oath. I don't personally know that, but it's not just simply that you show one side and what they say and the other side and what they say. Like, that's the whole point of critical thinking. You have to see what one side of the argument says and then what the other side of the argument says, and then say, okay, which of these two arguments add up? And in my professional opinion, which is the one that stacks up?
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting as well for people that are acquainted with the ABC and stuff like that, that they, the ABC kind of spends a lot of its time advocating for Indigenous rights and Indigenous exposure on issues and matters, and to see or to learn that they spent 70% of their time on this matter, basically presenting cases for the no campaign as opposed to the yes, which I would have thought would be at least 50-50 / if not more for the yes campaign, especially if they had an understanding that a majority of Indigenous persons would have supported it at that time, is mind-boggling. It really begs the question, why were they giving 70% coverage to something that was obviously not in line with their general ethos? Because like a lot of corporations or like media corporations and the private world, government organizations are all about, acknowledging country and paying respects to elders past, present, all that sort of stuff. But like, it really just feels like all of that is lip service in the context of providing significant platform well and above to the kind of no campaign, if you can call it that, which was kind of built, I would say, on, or what you're saying actually, on a campaign of misinformation and disinformation. It wasn't like you're saying critically and analyzing why this is a bad idea. This is going to screw up the Constitution, and like, we've only got one shot of doing this properly, and if you add something wrong into the Constitution, we'll never get it back out again. It didn't seem like that was the argument. It was more about, the emotional side of things, like getting people all riled up about identity politics, as I like to call it.
Yeah, but you did, that actually was another misinformation point, though, is that like, one of the talking points that they had was, if this goes into the Constitution, it's going to be permanent, which again is a complete misunderstanding of the Constitution, because just as much as you can put something into the Constitution via referendum, you can also take it out of the Constitution via a referendum. It's just harder to do because it's a foundational document.
Yeah.
But by all means, like, obviously, another piece of information that people didn't really understand until earlier this year, the Voice was actually bipartisan. So actually, no, until late December last year, it was bipartisan, as in 2017, when the Uluru dialogues were actually started, it was under Malcolm Turnbull. It was under the Liberals, and Bill Shorten was obviously the oppositional leader. Like, this whole process was started by the Liberals. So when David Littleproud came out as the head of the Nationals and said, we're opposing this, and then Dutton did in the early parts of 2023, that completely blindsided Labour and pretty much the other progressive parties, because up until that point, everyone believed in the Voice. So, however, which brings us to...
And like, do you find any kind of... is there any issue with that for IS, for you or the progressive kind of people that are advocating for the voice, knowing that this was actually initiated by a conservative government?
Well, actually, well, it depends what you mean by initiated, because really that's the whole point with the voice, is that it was bottom up. It actually came from, uh, the Uluru dialogues and the mobs themselves. Like, really, the whole thing with the voice is really quite impressive when you actually look into the detail behind it. Like, consulting the generation groups, consulting those people that actually live off country in all of those remote areas, the elders within all of those communities, because just for our international listeners and watchers, see what's interesting about Australia compared to other First Nations people around the world is that, let's look at our neighbors next to us. The Waitangi Partnership in New Zealand. Like, they were already established as a treaty before the white settlers came. Like, they actually had some sort of bargaining power,
Yeah.
to actually consult um, the white settlers. But with Australia, it was incredibly fragmented. As far as the New South Welshman mobs were concerned, the Western Australian ones just did not exist. Like, they had completely different cultures, completely different languages. It was all incredibly fragmented. So the fact that the communities went out of their way to be like, hey, you know what? We've had government after government, commission after commission promise to help us out with our needs. Screw it, let's do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's get started by starting a process where we can, you know, God helps those who helps themselves.
Yeah.
They
So okay. So it wasn't initiated by the Liberals, but it was first embraced by a Liberal government.
that's probably a better wording then.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And like, yeah, I was just wondering out of interest, as someone who was kind of, um, campaigning with other progressives, let's call them. Did anyone find that, like, I don't know, ironic or contradictory that, like, really you guys were campaigning for something that was embraced first by the Liberal Party, and then they ended up kind of abandoning it at the last moment or towards the end, and you guys were kind of fighting for something that, like, past Liberals were happy to support?
Well, see, but this is the fallout from this referendum, though, is um, Dutton has completely fragmented his party.
Mm,
So really, those people that believed in the voice, they did stick around. As in, your
yeah.
Malcolm Turnbulls, your Bridget Archers, like
Mm.
pretty much all the moderates, or for the Liberals, they did stick around because they actually did believe in the voice.
Now,
And
talking about moderates,
yeah,
sorry to cut you off.
yeah,
And like, this is, I guess, a more on the lighter side of what we've talked about on this matter. But like, I have a running theory then, and especially based on the results of what's happened. And I would like you to comment on this, if you don't mind. Like, I've found the kind of the whole idea of this referendum, in terms of where the support was actually coming from, to
Mhm.
be rather a bourgeois issue. Like, I saw the types of people that were behind the Yes campaign as opposed to the people that were kind of against it, and the people that were forming alliances, let's call
Mm.
them, around these matters, all seemed to be of a bourgeois nature. And like, I'd like you to comment on that and tell me if I'm full of crap, in saying something like that, or after, in retrospect, after you've analysed the situation, if there's any validity to that idea that this was a bourgeois matter of
Look,
contention.
and look, and there's two things I'm going to preface this, is that, look, one, hindsight is always 2020,
Yep.
and two, I guess we're kind of going into where the Yes campaign failed. And I'd like to preface that, hey, obviously, that I was a volunteer, and this is my personal opinion. This is not the opinion of any of the higher ups of the Yes campaign, etc., etc.
Yeah. Let's get rid of
And
yeah.
yeah,
Let's
like
throw
yeah.
away all the
So
prefaces. Let's do
so
this.
yeah, just in case somebody wants to clip me out, this is my personal opinion.
Yeah.
So look, I think it was actually one of the talking points of the No campaign that, oh, this is just an elitist group that is trying to force something on you. And the thing though is that I think the No campaign were very successful in showing that. I don't think that that the campaign, was a top down thing where all of the politicians were telling us what to think and what to do.
Yeah.
However, I think that the Yes campaign completely got its optics wrong.
Mm.
So, for example, let me take into consideration the the walk for yes that happened in Sydney. Okay, so we obviously all got to Redfern Park. There were like 30K people. It was like really impressive that many people kind of showed up in order to do the walk for yes. However, when we actually got to Redfern Park, they had the stage set up, etc., etc. We had the traditional like elder that came and said the welcome to country, and all of that. But then for a good 90% of the talks, it was basically just the politicians patting themselves on the back. It
Yeah.
was like, oh, isn't it great that the Greens are here? Isn't it great that the independent Lord Mayor is here? Isn't it great that the Liberals are for yes are here? Like, and everyone was kind of patting themselves on the back, and it was kind of a bad look, like
Mm.
almost to the point where I noticed a group of teenagers laughing next to the group that I was with, and they were just making fun of the politicians. And I, you know, I I'm not surprised that they kind of did that. And really, the whole thing kind of ended on a positive note, and actually really well, because one of the other elders impromptu decided to have a last minute speech, and it was like the best speech of the entire afternoon, and it kind of rallied everyone together, and we went and walked off, and we had so much energy. But the thing is, that wasn't planned. It's just
Yeah.
that elder was like, oh, I'm just so grateful for all these people being here. And, she
Yeah.
explained her story and her story of the people in Redfern. And, it was incredibly heartwarming and energizing. But
Mm.
that wasn't planned
Yeah.
because the politicians were too busy patting themselves on the
I was on the
back.
back. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Now, like, there's one thing that sorry, I really want to touch on. Um, is this idea of the culture war stuff, because it really seemed to be this whole thing was not about the issue at hand. It was more about post-truths and how people felt about it, as opposed to really being about the facts of whether this is a good idea or a bad idea to, want to do this type of thing. And like you've touched on Steve Bannon and like, how there's a flood of information and disinformation, all that sort of stuff. But like what I really want to get down to is like in the modern age, politics is very much defined by like the identity politics and like, which camp you sit on, as opposed to actually having, I guess, any concern with policy and like economic impacts and all that sort of stuff. It's more about what camp you sit in now, and like how you define yourself across like particular issues, as in like not even like this is a left issue and this is a right issue anymore. It's kind of just like the issues in themselves. You kind of take a stance one on, or you're with it or against it,
Yes.
and like that's fed into the culture war machine. So, like, I want you to just give me your understanding of why this ended up being like a culture war issue in the first place. Like, in my opinion, it's either like you care or you don't. Like, it affects you, so I guess you have an opinion on it. But like most people, it's probably not going to affect, I guess, in any real way. Like, it's like unless they go and sit in Parliament and listen to the advice that's going to be coming out of particular voices at different governmental levels, and they're really engaged in like going and sitting in local chambers and going to state parliament and watching the politicians talk. Like, I would say most people don't spend their time doing that. So, you know, most people wouldn't be affected by this directly. So, like, for me, it's just like, well, if you care enough about it, then like, have an opinion. If you don't, then, what does it mean to you? But it seemed to be very divisive. It was definitely like, oh no, we're in this camp and we're all for it, or we're definitely against it for these kind of more emotive reasons. So like, why was this a culture war? Like, why did this turn into a culture war? It
Yeah.
just, it's beyond me why it ended up being about this sort of stuff.
Well, I think there's 2 points to what you were saying before of how it ended up being divisive and being a culture war. And number one, I would say that really the nature of a referendum is it's a binary choice. You either say yes to the amendment or you say no. Like with every single other election that does happen here in Australia, is well, we see the comparison to say for America. I do find that we are incredibly detailed when it comes to our policies, and just with the preferencing that we do, um, I feel like it's much more of a fairer way of determining what the majority actually think when it comes to a typical election. But with this time around, I think it was just the nature of what a referendum is. You either said yes or you said no. And two, as immediately once it wasn't bipartisan anymore. So when Little Proud and Dutton uh, said, as far as they were concerned, the Nationals and the Liberals were voting no on this. Suddenly all the marketing came out from the No campaign saying that it was Labor's voice. That their whole slogan was, vote no to the divisive voice. Like
Mm,
they just kept on trying to reinforce that it was the other side that was being divisive.
mm.
And naturally, if you're showing that sort of message, that's going to kind of rile people up. And
So people were riled up. That's why this turned into a culture war, because people started to get emotional and passionate about sitting on one side of the fence, as opposed to what I was kind of saying, which is like people, unless it affects them directly somehow, like why would they even care? Like, people got
yeah.
really emotional about this, but like, why did it turn to that? Why did it get to the culture wars? Just because the Liberal Party decided that, like, or the coalition decided that they were gonna, you know, walk away from support, so people started picking sides and getting all angry about it. Like, what
Yeah,
made
because
this?
I feel like it eventually turned into, um, if you valued uh, progressive identity politics, then you would vote this
Yes,
way. And
yeah.
if you didn't really care about any of that, you kind of went the other way, or at
Mm,
least if you didn't understand, because this was one of probably the strong points of the No campaign and probably the weak points of the Yes campaign. Is
mm,
that, look, the No campaign had, if you don't know, vote no.
yeah,
Like, yeah,
yeah.
sure. Like, don't get me wrong. I know a lot of Yes campaigners who were snarky and said like, "Oh, you're promoting ignorance, blah blah blah." But the fact of the matter is that that phrase did cut through.
Yeah, yeah.
It did what it was designed to do, which was if you weren't engaged or you didn't understand what it was all about, then you just didn't worry about it. You voted no.
Mm. And like, there's
Like, and the only thing I'll add to that is
yeah,
that
yeah,
the weak point of the Yes campaign is it it wasn't necessarily that that it had a brilliant slogan itself. It actually reacted to that sort of negativity, and it said, "Well, if you don't know." If you don't know, find out, or if you don't know, Google it. Like
yeah, yeah.
it was a reaction, or at least it was piggybacking off those sort of slogans, um, and like it wasn't really promoting something from its own
Yeah,
identity.
it was always on the back foot by the sounds of it.
Yeah,
So then, like, that perfect transition into what I kind of want to finish on here is, like, look, constitutional change, like I've already said, is a revolutionary activity. It's not what people would usually classify as revolution because it's not sexy and violent and uprising or coup style. It's like actual democratic revolution, right? Like it's actually people voting on whether they change the way that their society should be made up. So, in saying that, are there any revolutionary lessons here from this referendum? Is there anything that you've learned from it for IS as a campaigner? Is there anything that could have been done better? Like, what do you take away from this? If you could, if you could do it all again, or if you were going to gear up for your next kind of revolutionary moment as a campaigner,
yeah.
what would you learn from this whole saga?
Well, okay. Well, I'll I'll, I'll just envision a world where I'm heading the campaign um and my team is heading the campaign, and like what I would do. I personally, I like don't get me wrong. I If it was actually part of the Uluru uh, statement of the heart that having recognition and having listening tied in, where you actually present the question to people of, oh, do you want to recognize people as well as the voice proposal? Like, obviously, that's not the specific question, but it kind of links together recognizing First Nations people as well as the voice proposal. It kind of clumps those things together. Um, it may, like, when I actually saw that, I actually looked back at the 1967 referendum, and actually they did multiple questions. Like, you can actually do more than one question, and the first question was actually what they called a nexus question. So it was actually tightening up how they actually do census data. So it was fixing up the Australian Bureau of Statistics and also how they collect census data. And then they took out the various sections. I think it was in section 51 as well as 127, where it was deliberately discriminating against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people where they weren't counted.
Hmm.
But the funny thing is that with that question, with having both of those questions, if one of like, because in naturally in a referendum you would have to write yes or no for one question, then write yes or no for the other one, and
Yeah.
naturally both you need both of them to pass for the amendments to actually go through. But the thing though is that, say in a scenario we had, um, do you want to recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution? You can have that as a question, and then say what you want to about the voice proposal.
Yeah.
Say,
Yeah.
because they've been bundled together, we've put all of our eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
If the voice proposal does not get up and put into the Constitution, then you've completely lost the Overton window. Like, the issue is outside of the Overton window, and you've like, you have no mandate for the issue anymore.
Yeah.
Now, but if you put this two separate questions, say for example, everyone thought, oh yeah, I definitely would like to recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution. Oh, but I don't like the voice proposal. Then you still have that mandate because,
Mm.
sure, like don't get me wrong, like it's really sad that all of those years of consultation and dialogue with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people has just gone up in smoke.
Yeah.
But you still can go back to the people and say like, oh well, you still want them to be recognized. We just have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's obviously that. I obviously with what I was saying before. I felt like yes, I fully understand that the progressive, like yes campaigners were completely blindsided by Dutton and Little Proud going against the voice because really, when it comes down to it, uh, Peter Dutton has completely kamikazed his career. Like coming out of the voice, I think as preferred prime minister, he's had a swing of like 90-20% to him, and like nobody likes him now.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
with how he's conducted himself in this entire referendum. But I would want to feel like if I was presented with with a scenario, I would want to hope for the best but plan for the worst. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what like just in case things didn't go your way, then what like brainstorm what you would do in a scenario when it wasn't bipartisan. Like, what would
Yeah.
you do when suddenly uh, and other parties aren't working with you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would want to work that out. And definitely, the first thing I would do is work like whether it's focus groups or anything like that. Um, don't get me wrong, like a slogan based on fighting for a better future, like it sounds great, but it's not on the same level as don't know, vote no.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would like if I would try and work out the vision of the campaign, so it's punchy where at least when people think of whatever the referendum's about, they think of my phrase, not what the no campaigners are saying, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. I think some
Um,
good lessons. Good
yeah,
lessons there.
there was one more thing that I wanted to say. Um, actually, and that probably ties neatly of I guess with the Yes campaign, we were incredibly reactive. Like, oh, there's no detail. Here's no, there is detail with this. Oh, it's elites. No, it's not that. It like because we kept on putting out the fires. I would say in the planning of hey, if it suddenly becomes partisan, then workshop of okay, what are with our proposal that we have in front of us, what are all of the possible scenarios that uh, they could throw at us? So basically, steelman the no argument and be like, okay, they say it's no detail. Okay, let's put out necessary ads and try as much as we can to when people think of no detail, they think of our talking points rather than theirs.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
try to preempt it as much, but
Yeah.
to be honest, like I can understand if this is all sound a bit wishy washy because I guess I'm kind of talking generally and really
Well,
at
it's a
the end
general
of it,
question, really. Like, what can you learn
but
from this experience?
what I would say as well, the unfortunate thing with the fallout of all of this is I would question whether you can have a referendum or at least propose a amendment with the media concentration that is happening right now,
Mm.
and can you actually? uh, can you actually do anything against this kind of media concentration without putting in some sort of regulation of truth telling in advertising as well as
Mm,
in the media in general?
yeah,
Like, really, the misinformation, the disinformation spread like wildfire because there was no accountability.
yeah, yeah. I,
Um,
I think that's a good point to end it on.
okay.
Yeah, it's like it surmises, I think, a lot of the stuff that you've been talking about um, already, and you've touched on a lot. I just wanted to pick your brain before we before we end the session, on what you thought we could learn from that. But yeah, uh, not a bad discussion. I'm going to sign myself off first, and I'm going to leave it to you. We're going to switch things up today. But before we do that, we're going to just quickly
Yes.
talk about our synthwave art. And it's another very interesting one, a little bit more on the nose than the last ones we've had. It's and very neo and retro look at what it is to present the news.
Yes.
Very plastic, very artificial.
Yes, it is. The prompt for this one is manufacturing consent in papers and media.
Okay, okay, yeah. And it's just another thing that just suits the retro vibe so well. Like synthwave nails this type of retro stuff. But yes, thank you everyone for listening. My name is MysterE. Please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery. And to sign us off, 4IS.
Yes, thank you everyone for tuning in, and remember to keep thinking and keep learning.